we were talking about knowledge and we were talking about partnership. So I think this is a great introduction to this work on nature-based solutions. So I'm Stéphane Algat. I'm a climate change senior advisor at the World Bank. I've been in GFDRR a few years ago, and so it's really a pleasure to see some of the faces I was interacting with a few years ago. Glad to be here. I'm introducing here a new report that GFDRR has supported and realized on nature-based solutions for climate resilience. And it's, of course, a very important topic. Nature-based solutions is a key topic in many of the conversations we have here, but also Axel mentioned the evolution roadmap, where nature-based solutions is also something that is clearly prioritized by many of our stakeholders, donors, and client countries alike. And this is sort of a no-brainer, right? I mean, who doesn't like nature-based solutions? More efficient, more resilient, nicer to look at, maybe. Also able to capture a lot of co-benefits. So it's not only about resilience, but it's also about biodiversity, about access to nature, about quality of life. And still, even though everybody likes nature-based solutions, it's surprisingly difficult to scale them up. And when we look at the projects, it's still something that is at the frontier, not something that is considered just the normal way of doing things, including in climate resilience, even though that might be one of the sectors where the use of nature-based solutions is the most discussed and the most useful. And everybody's talking about using mangroves, about the role of forests for water management. Still, this seems to be difficult. And one of the issue that when you talk to people and asking them, like, what is the problem? What is the barrier? One of the challenge is always data, economic analysis, making the case that this is a good investment and not just something nice. And so we really felt the need to contribute to the discussion about the methodologies, the economics of nature-based solutions, so that we can make that case not only to people who know the topic, but also to another type of experts in Ministry of Finance, in the financial industry, to explain that this is not something that is just popular. This is something that is good economics and make a lot of sense. And so the report we'll be launching today is really a contribution to that work, trying to provide guidance about how to do a good economic analysis on nature-based solutions so that we can convince beyond the range of people who have been working on the topic. So in terms of agenda, we'll start with a presentation about nature-based solutions. We have with us Marta Vicarelli. She's professor at University of Massachusetts. And I was asking Niels how to pronounce this, and I have no idea how to do so. But Amherst. Oh, like French people. Excellent. So Amherst. Good, excellent choice. So she will. So she's assistant professor of economics, and she has been working on those topics for a long time. And she will just open this session with a broad discussion about the topic. It will be followed by Boris van Zaten, and so I think we'll just go one by one. But so Boris is one of the disaster risk management specialists at GFDRR. And is one of the key authors of the reports, and he will present the main finding of this report. And this will be followed by a panel discussion, but I'll introduce the panelists when we get there. So Marta, please, the floor is yours.
Is it okay if I don't use the mic, or should I use the mic?
I think you have to use the mic because we have people connected.
Yeah. Yes, okay. So this is actually for yes. Oh, this is to go forward. Okay, sorry. All right. So first of all, thank you for introducing myself, me. And I wanted to say something about myself, which is that I want to give you a little glimpse to the results of a study that we have recently developed on cost effectiveness of nature-based solutions. We know that ecosystem and ecosystem services help achieve many benefits. Reduction in disaster risk, sustainable development. Stefan mentioned biodiversity enhancement, climate change mitigation, etc., etc. And we also know that they have been recognized, nature-based solutions have been recognized in major international framework agreements. The issue, however, is that we still have limited scientific knowledge about the economic performance, both in terms of cost effectiveness and in terms of equity and distributional considerations. When I say limited scientific knowledge, is really like the peer review knowledge. What do we know? So I wanted to emphasize this aspect of benefits before I jump into my study, and emphasize the large variety of benefits that go beyond the initial goals and include what in ecology we describe as provisioning services, regulating services of ecosystems, and also cultural services. So now, going into the study, our research question was to assess existing scientific knowledge about cost effectiveness of ecosystem services with a focus on of nature-based solutions, with the focus on ecosystem for disaster risk reduction, nature-based solutions for climate change adaptation and mitigation. Oh, sorry. In order to answer this research question, we developed a database of peer-reviewed scientific literature, and there were 3 criteria for studies to be included into this database. The first criteria was that the study had to perform an economic assessment of the net benefits of nature-based solutions, and that the intervention considered, so the economic assessment had to examine the protective services, so the disaster risk reduction component. And the third condition for studies to be included in the database was that the outcomes compared intervention with no intervention or with a different type of intervention. The protocol was very laborious. We started with 20,000 studies, and after multiple rounds of screening and in-depth review, we compiled a database of 87 studies. So very, very conservative. Something that I should mention is that, again, we looked on the peer review literature, English-speaking journals published between 2000 and 2021. And one of the first results that you see here is that there has been growth in the publications, scientific publications, and you can see upticks in correspondence immediately after major policy milestones that were of importance in relation to nature-based solutions. So, for example, after the IPCC special report on extremes, the Sendai framework, SFDRR, Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction, and then COP21, the Paris Agreement. We examined every study in relation to the ecosystems analyzed and the hazard analyzed. And here, columns correspond to the ecosystem analyzed, and the rows correspond to the hazards. And what you can see is that the most frequently studied ecosystems are coastal, wetland, and forest ecosystems, and the most frequently studied hazards are floods, storms, and erosion. So this is like a heat map to understand where is the research focusing on. This slide contains 2 different pieces of information. In the graph, on the left-hand side, you see property rights structure of the nature-based solutions analyzed, and on the right-hand side, you see sources of finance. Now, chromatically, the dark blue correspond to public, light blue to private, and yellow mixed. So if we focus on property rights, and each row corresponds to a type of ecosystem, in terms of property rights, you see that the property rights structure dominating is mixed, which means that private and public entities are sharing the management of the nature-based solutions. On the right-hand side, you see sources of finance. And what you see there is that public financing dominates the financing structure. This is the geographic distribution of the studies. For each study, we geolocalized the observations, so the locations of each study. One study could correspond to multiple locations. So in the map, you see many dots, and these dots correspond to the observations associated to the 87 studies. And we have 402 observations. There are two colors for the observations. You see yellow dots and blue dots. The yellow dots correspond to observations associated with studies that found that nature-based solutions are cost-effective. And the blue dots are associated with studies that found that nature-based solutions are cost-effective sometimes under certain circumstances. We didn't find any article saying that nature-based solutions are not cost-effective. A little bit more about cost-effectiveness. Overall, 71% of studies said that nature-based solutions are cost-effective, and 24% of studies said that nature-based solutions are cost-effective under certain circumstances. And you see the breakdown by type of ecosystem in this slide. We also looked a little bit more in depth and trying to see whether our studies were comparing engineering solutions with nature-based solutions. And we found that 39% of studies were performing this comparison. And within these 39% of studies, 65% found that nature-based solutions are more cost-effective than engineering solutions, and 26% found that nature-based solutions are more cost-effective under certain circumstances. Again, no study found that they were less cost-effective. Something that we found interesting actually was that only 48% of studies reported that nature-based solution analysis contributed to biodiversity benefits. Obviously, this is not because it's not true, it's just that the analyses were not necessarily performed. And particularly, very few studies, among these 48%, very few studies attempted to measure the benefits or to even evaluate them monetarily. Like, the evaluation was really very, very few. As you know, when we think about cost effectiveness or cost efficiency, that doesn't necessarily incorporate equity and distributional considerations. And so we also looked at the studies trying to understand the nexus between nature-based solutions, income inequalities, gender, race and ethnicity, participation of indigenous groups and local communities in the planning and in the fruition of these solutions, and then the contribution to sustainable development goals. And what we found was that only 30% of studies investigated these relationships. This is, I'm not going to go into the details of this slide. It's just to tell you that we cataloged all the methodologies adopted to estimate the net benefits of nature-based solutions. So net benefits meaning the total benefits minus the total cost. And what I wanted to highlight in this slide is simply that only 22% of studies performed the cost-benefit analysis, and actually even a smaller fraction of the total number of studies adopted best practices in the performance of the cost-benefit. So, few conclusions before sharing some recommendations. I think that based on our results, we can say that nature-based solutions are cost-effective in mitigating hazards. We were particularly surprised. There could be always publication bias, but it's very strong, the signal that none of the studies examined found them non-effective, non-cost-effective in mitigating hazards. The other finding that was surprising to us and very interesting in my opinion is that despite finding that they are cost-effective, these nature-based solutions, we still see that benefits are understudied and underestimated. So they are cost-effective and yet benefits are still understudied and underestimated. Another aspect that I thought was interesting is this financing structure and the fact that public sector is essentially supporting the financing of nature-based solutions. And when we think about upscaling, probably we should think also about innovative ways to finance nature-based solutions that involve also the private sector. Based on its based on their cost effectiveness, I think that it's clear that nature-based solutions emerge as very useful tools to mitigate the biodiversity climate crisis. And an additional element that I wanted to bring to the discussion, and that emerged in so many of the articles that we analyzed, is that ecosystem conservation is more effective, more efficient than restoration, because it's achieved at a lower cost. A few recommendations. The evidence of paucity of data about the benefits of nature-based solutions. So we still have to investigate more aspects. When I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation the large variety of benefits of nature-based solutions, we are investigating only some of the benefits, not all of them. We still have to do more work in understanding all the benefits that they provide, or at least recognizing them. And it seems that this paucity of evidence is also one of the factors limiting the upscaling of nature-based solutions. In order to talk about all these benefits and incorporate them in the analysis, there are several efforts that should be undertaken: expanding data collection efforts, engaging with local stakeholders to understand really the repercussions at a local scale, adopting comprehensive evaluation methods. And so it emerges the need for evaluation framework that is comprehensive and reliable and rigorous. And so in this, and rigorous, and not only to measure and compare, but also to communicate these benefits to stakeholders involved in the development of nature-based solutions and in the fruition. And so in this slide, I think, bridging to Boris' talk, in this slide, I think that this publication that Boris is about to present is extremely timely and needed, providing guidelines to assess the benefits and costs of nature-based solutions for climate resilience. Before leaving the floor, I just wanted to acknowledge all the people that supported this study from many organizations, and I'm sure that some of you are familiar with PEDRA, the Euro-Mediterranean Center for Climatic Change, and then also would like to recognize my colleagues at the University of Massachusetts Amherst College, and then University of Cologne. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marta. So that's give a good picture of what is done now, and now we have Boris about what should be done. And I understand we'll start with a video.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Marta. Indeed, I'm very happy to stand here to be able to launch this report and present it to you. Before I give you a quick overview, a quick feel of the contents and where the resources can be accessed, we'll start with a quick video.
Around the world, communities have begun harnessing the power of nature as a cost-effective and sustainable way to adapt to climate change and support their livelihoods. Nature-based solutions are actions to protect, manage, or restore natural ecosystems, like restoring mangroves for storm surge protection, or developing a park designed to reduce city flooding. But despite the huge potential, financing for nature-based solutions is only gradually increasing. Now, the World Bank and the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, GFDRR, are scaling up support to enable further integration of nature-based solutions and inspiring governments, communities, and investors to work with nature to better solve our climate challenges. Unlike gray infrastructure, nature-based solutions provide multiple benefits at the same time. But one of the barriers to unlocking more financing is that valuing and communicating these benefits is sometimes challenging. Let's look at an example. First is the action. A country decides to invest in coastal wetland restoration, aiming at reducing flood risk. This leads to impacts on the biophysical processes, which means storm surges and wave energy are reduced by the restored vegetation. This improves the provision of ecosystem services. a significant reduction in flood levels, and an increase in the fish stock. Increasing the benefits to the people, less damage to assets, and less business interruptions, but also an increase in fishing revenue and new opportunities for recreation. Identifying and assessing the wide range of benefits and beneficiaries is a powerful way to help communities, policymakers, and the private sector make informed decisions to invest more in nature-based solutions. Let's work together with nature to make our communities more resilient to climate change. These guidelines are now available for download at naturebasedsolutions.org.
Yeah, so no, very happy to be able to share this report and launch this report with you on behalf of GFDR and our technical line of work on nature-based solutions. This has been an endeavor that has involved the different sectors, different sectoral experts at the World Bank, and also I'm presenting this on a long list of co-authors who've been working on this with our team over the past year. I should also say that it builds very much upon work that we've been doing with our partners at Stanford University, at the University of California, Santa Cruz, at the VU University in Amsterdam, that have all contributed to this work. So first, I'm going to say very quickly something about our technical line of work on nature-based solutions for climate resilience. That has led the development of this report, and then I'll kind of dive into the report itself. So just really quickly, I think I also touched upon this in the morning, but this is a global line of work that is a collaboration between GFDRR and also the water and environment sectors at the World Bank, and the objective of our team is really to help World Bank task teams and clients with the integration of nature-based solutions for climate resilience at the project level. And I think Marta's presentation probably gave a good feeling of what these type of nature-based solutions are. So it's often working in the city with green infrastructure to reduce flooding or to reduce extreme heat. In some cases, it's about kind of coastal ecosystem restoration or protection, such as mangroves or coral reefs. But it could also be like catchment level interventions, for example. Yeah, the way we work is really we have a team of experts who is kind of directly supporting our task teams in the country to help them with the identification, with the necessary technical support, with the capacity building to help them kind of integrate these solutions into their project. And on this slide, it's just some of the preliminary results to date. I'm saying preliminary because we're at the end of a reporting period, so some of these estimations might still be a bit on the conservative side. But on the map, you can see some of the countries where we have ongoing engagements. We've supported over the past 2 years over 40 projects or projects that are in preparation. We've informed activities reaching over 11 million beneficiaries. But also we are kind of, we aim to be a knowledge leader. So we have a large library of knowledge that is accessible to World Bank teams and people from outside the World Bank. And we keep databases of experts. So like if a project team from a certain country comes to us, we suggest expert teams to them. And then we also, of course, have we develop targeted knowledge products. So one of them is the piece that we present today, and those are some of them are very successful as well, with over 40,000 downloads of the key products combined. So I think one of the catalog of nature-based solutions for urban resilience should also be around. So feel free to have a look. Yeah. So diving back into this report. So why this report, right? And this is in our work with teams, we are getting a lot of requests, as Stefan also mentioned, we're getting a lot of requests on the, okay, but how do you do the economics actually? And how can you show that this is effective for both reducing disaster risk, but also generating these other benefits. And we think this really can help with doing the project leads, but also the client, but also the technical experts on the team, with kind of better understand like what are the realistic options to do such analysis within the constraints that you have in a project. So the main content and scope you can see here on the screen. So it's really about kind of defining the audience, defining what is needed, but also kind of a quick rundown of the key concepts and methods. And then I think a very important part is actually the step to the practical application, where we kind of give some provide a framework of like what can be done in the context of of a project and the constraints you have in terms of time and resources, and also what is the level of detail you need. And the scope in terms of nature-based solutions, what we work with in the guidance is this set of main types of interventions around forests, terraces, and slopes. I'm not going to read them all, but this is we try to be very practical and focus on those interventions. So if we analyze the value of nature-based solutions, it is really about, I think, really the added value of this report is that we bring together approaches from different disciplines, from different academic disciplines, right? So there is like the risk assessment approaches, but combined with kind of the ecosystem service valuation approaches from environmental science. And if you want to value nature-based solutions well, you have to kind of bring those together in a single approach. So we quite heavily built on this framework that is kind of basically used both in the risk assessment and in the nature-based or in the ecosystem services research, where you just try to link what is the intervention, how does it change kind of the biophysical process, the way it actually regulates the different hazards, and how does it lead to benefits to people. And one very practical thing that I put here on the slides, what we try to do is, okay, for each of these nature-based solutions, how do they affect different processes that regulate like issues such as flooding, heat, landslide, etc., to be able to give really clear and pragmatic guidance on like how you can actually analyze those processes. And another key point, and I think Marta and both Marta and Stefan highlighted this, is of course, if you really want to understand the value of these solutions, you have to look beyond just the value of risk reduction or reducing flooding or heat. But it's really important to do an inclusive type of valuation that also looks at the other benefits. And of course, these can also be distributional and equity considerations, as Marta mentioned. So, for example, what some of these studies have done, some of the projects have done, is also look at job creation around nature-based solutions, or about inclusion and gender aspects, and like how, for example, certain vulnerable groups can benefit from those type of investments, by creating jobs for them. So that's a very important aspect. And what we do in this guidance is kind of help linking different benefits to different solutions, but also provide guidance on how you can actually value it. What are some of the methods that you can use? So I think that's the theoretical side now. So this is how you can do it, and this is how we can package the theoretical part in a sort of a clear and understandable way. But then there's the issue of course, different phases in a project require different analysis. So when you're more, you can imagine that when you're more like in the early project identification phase, it's more like a national level strategic assessment, whereas when you have already very clear designs for coastal protection interventions, like mangroves combined with embankments, for example, you need to do a very much more detailed analysis at the site level. So that's also something we try to address here by providing a kind of, these texts are quite small, apologies for that, but to provide a sort of a tiered approach where you for each step in the analysis, identify what kind of level of detail you need, and also how you can leverage all the existing data that's already out there. Because often when what we see when we look at the case studies, when you look at the good examples, often what the successful studies have done is used like an existing flood risk assessment with very detailed information that's already there, or have used like natural capital accounts that were already developed for another project, for example, and kind of quickly repackaged and used that information for to inform a project. So this is really about two questions, no? So like, what is the objective? So like, what is the project phase? What's the decision context? And then also like how much data and resources are available. So and based on that, you can go for a more like secondary data-based approach, quick approach, or more local data dependent and detailed approach. So I think one of the key useful components, or like one of the most useful components of this report, is this collection of case studies. So we have, and here you see the visualization of the case studies. So on the left, we have 8 case studies in Jamaica, in Mozambique. We have 2 case studies in Seychelles, in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, and in China. And in these case studies, they also have a sort of a representative selection of different nature-based solutions types. So it covers everything from landslides, from coastal ecosystems, from urban nature-based solutions. And these case studies are structured following what you can see on the right of the slide here. So it's about like where in the project does this inform, what kind of decisions in the project does it inform, what kind of economic analysis is applied, what kind of nature-based solutions is it? Is it about protection? Is it about rehabilitation? And what are some of the benefits that are considered in the analysis? So the case studies give very practical guidance on how they can be replicated. Yeah, the guidelines are live now. You are more than welcome to download them either from naturebasedsolutions.org, which is the website of our program, and they're available there. Yeah, I would say just have a look, and I hope they're useful for you. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. So I'll just invite to join me first Nisha Krishnan. She's with the World Resources Institute. She's a director for climate resilience in the Africa region. And she has been working on advancing policy and practice on climate action. So a good person to have with us today. Our second panelist will be Sergio Perez from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, a big supporter of nature-based solution. And finally, Julie Rosenberg. She's senior economist in the Office of the Regional Director for Sustainable Development in the Eastern Europe and Central Asia region, but just moving from the Latin American Caribbean region. So let me start with you, Sergio. As I was saying, the Swiss Agency has been a big supporter of nature-based solutions, and I think one of the questions for us is what is your motivation, right? Why did you pick this as a priority for your support, and what it is that you try to push, right? What is the goal over the short run?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. I would like to first make a clarification, not to be confused with the Formula One pilot. So just to make sure, I don't have 2 jobs, just the only one for the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Stefan, thanks for the question. Well, Switzerland has a long history of working with nature-based solutions, mostly for DRR. The 40% of the forests in the country are protected forests that are meant to be protect from avalanche, some small town and small urban areas. So we have a long tradition of this kind of solutions, and that also went into our international cooperation, and we're very glad to have been one of the supporters through our contribution to the Resilience to Climate Change program that with the years turned into this nature-based solutions program. So we're very glad to have been able to support this. That having said of this, of the importance of the protective of the nature-based solutions for protection for DRR, we also have to say that our Office for Environment and it's very clear that the nature-based solutions are not alone, are not enough. They have to be combined very often with green infrastructure or with green measures. So this just to make sure. Well, nature-based solutions are very interesting also because of the co-benefits, but they have to be in many cases to guarantee safety requirements. They have to be combined with green measures. So, but as was said here, well, I think the most interesting part of the nature-based solutions are its co-benefits. So the part on biodiversity, on provision of materials for construction or food, or perhaps new opportunities for job creation related to tourism, or and of course for climate, for carbon sequestration, climate regulation, and also in urban areas for microclimate, for combating heat. So. Well, yes, and in our international cooperation, we've had a long history. Well, in Central America, we did this compendium of bioengineering measures. We also supported the government of North Korea on bioengineering for DRR and better livelihoods. We have a new program in the Andean region for ecosystem management for DRR. And also in the humanitarian side, for example, for refugee camps in Bangladesh and Cox's Bazar, the use of bamboo to build refugee camps and also opportunities for job creation. This you can combine. So another interesting aspect is that you can approach these nature-based solutions either from the side of DRR or from the side of climate change adaptation, and also from poverty reduction. So in fact, it's the co-benefits that might make this more attractive than, let's say, the traditional engineering measures.
Thank you, and thank you for your support on this. And I want to say this part of trying to get the case studies together to get lessons that others can use is something that's often more difficult to find resources for, but it's absolutely critical if we want to build this as a tool that everybody's using. It's good to do the pilots, but if the pilots don't get together into something which is more guidance everybody can use, it's very difficult. So thank you very much for the support for this work. This is greatly appreciated. I had told the team that I'm a terrible moderator, and I should have asked Marta to join me here. So I'm just forgetting one of my panelists. So this one I think will stay following me. I'm glad I had my phone that was just ringing furiously to remind me. So I'll get back to you in a minute. But first, Nisha, so you're focusing on Africa, of course, and that's sort of a case with limited capacity, but also maybe one of the biggest potential. So for you, what would be the priority in your region? And again, maybe focusing on the quick gains, right? What can we do now?
Thanks, Stefan, and thanks for having me on this panel. So I think just to pick up on this idea of capacity, I think one of the biggest challenges is just awareness, right? So I think one of the value adds for this report, for the work that Marta is doing, is that you actually have a database almost of use cases of where this is happening from a public perspective, and where this can happen also from a private perspective. So I think awareness and this integration, as you mentioned earlier, into how ministries of finance think about this, and how not from just an annual investment plan process, but also from a longer term trajectory process, as to the same ways that we are having actually challenges with even ministries of finance taking on the adaptation challenge. But how do you add nature-based solutions as a potential solution to actually potentially divest a little bit from the gray infrastructure solutions? Only how do you integrate this to their sort of agenda on climate resilient agriculture, on water issues, and use this as a way of actually increasing the uptake of NBS solutions? The second piece I would say is that from Marta's presentation, it was really interesting, obviously, how little private investment goes into this. And so the extent to which there is work that we can do to really bring domestic private sector in particular to appreciate the value of nature-based solutions, because at the end of the day, even if you have your institutional investors from an external perspective to the continent, appreciating nature-based solutions if you don't have sort of project developers and the private sector within the continent actually also appreciating MBS as a solution, as an opportunity to actually have sort of financial benefits from, not just economic benefits from, then I don't think we're going to get very far. So I think those two are probably the well, both the easiest, also the hardest to do at the same time because of the number of actors you have to get to. But that's, I think, where I would focus some of the work that you're already starting to do and think about.
And just very briefly, how are those solutions seen on the ground? Are they still seen as something which is like nice to have, or it started to move and
I would say I think it's starting to move. So I think there is, for example, there was the launch of the African Natural Capital Alliance not too long ago last year that really starts to push this idea that there's a financial benefit to the continent, to the countries, even in terms of tax revenue, in terms of infrastructure sort of development, that natural capital and nature-based solutions can actually promote mobilization of resources. So I think there's a lot more appetite for this. I think this is also coming out from the NBS for restoration sort of purposes, and the extent to which from a mitigation perspective, you can actually tap into carbon markets, right? So, but I think thinking and drilling down into the second order benefits of what restoration means in terms of water quality, in terms of water access, less land degradation, and reduction in landslides and such are all things that we can explore. But I think governments in general there, at least the countries that WRI works in, there's a lot of appetite and appreciation for this. It's just, well, what do you do once you've appreciated it? I think is the question.
Well, it's a good question that I'll ask Julie. So Julie, you have worked on this type of economic analysis. So maybe it could be useful to just have a little summary of that experience of how the economic analysis helps design the project and makes it implemented.
Yes, absolutely. So, well, thank you for inviting me. One of the case studies that's in the guidelines is a project I worked on some years ago at the World Bank in Colombo. So it was an urban development project. It was a big component on flood reduction. Most of it was engineering solutions, but there was a very small component that was on wetland protection. But the team didn't know yet what to do. And I joined the team at the very beginning of implementation. And we were working with the Land Reclamation Agency on the detailed design of the project. They had a hydrological model that was funded by GFDRR at the time. But all they could model about the wetlands was the flood retention capacity. And they could see in their model that it was very important, but their only idea was basically, oh, let's turn them into lakes so that we maintain the flood retention capacity because the wetlands were being lost to urban development that was uncontrolled. And so we came in and we said, why don't we do an economic analysis of protecting the wetlands? And we look at the trade-offs between protecting the wetlands, creating lakes, and letting urban development just sprawl. And we also looked at the opportunity cost of not letting urban development sprawl with Paulo's model there. It was a very interesting economic analysis. In the end, we showed that protecting the wetlands was the best solution from an economic perspective. And that was extremely useful to the clients. They said that having the economic angle was really useful to them. It allowed them to convince many more decision makers than protecting the wetland made sense. And they created a unit within the Land Reclamation Agency that was in charge of the wetlands. And they then funded another project to assess in more details all the benefits of the wetlands that we had not assessed under our project. So overall, that was a very successful experience. I think we came right at the right time with clients that were very interested and that just needed technical support, basically.
And maybe following up on this, I mean, one of the issue is that takes a lot of data, takes a lot of analytics. You don't always have the data available, but also the time and resources, the capacity on the ground. So the guidance is talking about what you can do in different contexts with different amount of data and time and resources. But how do you advise about that? Like when you don't have enough, are there like second best solutions that can be mobilized?
Yes, so indeed, I have to say we didn't calculate the benefits in terms of biodiversity, for example, even though there are endangered species that live in those wetlands. But we did try to capture as many as we could, and because of all the uncertainty that was there, we used this approach that we call decision making and a deep uncertainty that I've been working with a lot at the World Bank. And so what we did is that we said, okay, we have these three options, protecting the wetlands, letting urban development sprawl, or creating lakes. And we stress tested all the options to a wide range of future scenarios, including climate change and including other factors. What we found was that protecting the wetlands was the low regret solution, which is often the case for a nature-based solution, which is the one that basically brings you reversibility, flexibility. If it turns out that flood risk is not so high in Colombo after all, you can always decide to, replace the wetlands by some buildings, but you cannot reverse it the other way. So using this DMDU approach or robust decision-making approach, we also showed the value of nature-based solution in terms of flexibility in decision-making.
Nisha, I'm getting back to you. Julie mentioned the institutional part of it, right? Having the people looking at the analysis and using it. Is that something that also helps bringing the communities, bringing all of the stakeholders and getting sort of a consensus on those solutions?
I think so, yes. I mean, I think without community stakeholders, especially when you're doing, say, NBS projects within commonly owned property, or where public benefits are, without community stakeholders, I don't think you have the long-term sort of success of the project, right? A lot of nature-based solutions does require management over time, and who has access, who derives benefits from that, I think really means that we need to have communities involved in that. And I would say that, for example, some of the restoration work that we've done from a WRI perspective, some things that we're involved in, that has also sort of led and emphasized, for example, entrepreneurship and employment opportunities from a nature-based solution sort of project, right? So how do you actually also have joint ownership of the investments that we're making in these communities? Because there is also a risk in the privatization or the valuation of natural capital benefits over longer term, is that it can become much more privatized, in which case who does the equity and who derives benefits from it can also change. And I do think that's something that we need to be aware of as we embark on this valuation sort of, or actually deepen our valuation agenda as we go forward. But I think without having community actors there as potential guardrails on that conversation, I think we can go a very different route than the one that we actually want to go on.
Thank you. And I'll get back to Sergio now, because we, as was expected, right? It's a really good idea to do nature-based solutions. So we have those guidelines now. Just can you share your thought about where should we go next, right? And that's the role of these guidelines, which can be useful at GFDRR and within the World Bank. But of course, I think the real price is to get that beyond GFDRR and the World Bank, to just try to affect how people assess projects everywhere. So I don't know if you have ideas about how we can go to this next step.
I have some ideas, but I don't know how new they are. But because my first reflex is, for example, we at the SDC, we support, we contribute, and we work with GFDRR exactly to have this kind of leverage. So to be able to influence the World Bank. So you're already doing this, and you're ready. So this is not kind of new, but keep doing it, and you're doing it very well. So this one person influencing the investments by the World Bank and through the World Bank, as you call them, the clients or the countries, right? We don't call them clients. Sorry. So, but yeah, through this work and your work with national governments and local governments and cities, well, trying to get this. But then I was reading the guidelines. I couldn't go into deep, and I think they're very good, but they need, I would say they need to there should be, or an idea would be kind of having some kind of workshops or dissemination strategy or support, so that people know how to use it and be able to use it. Perhaps it's good enough now, clear enough for World Bank staff, but perhaps for other partners it's not that easy. Then I would say, what about, well, extending it to other development banks? I don't know if you see them as partners or as competitors, but the regional banks is going to other to broader constituencies. And then, well, another of the ideas, but you were talking and you were very right. I said, okay, there is a business case for nature-based solutions that they offer so many co-benefits. So there might be, doing this business case might interest private sector to invest in them. But of course, you have to take care that these benefits go, as you said, go to the right persons, that local communities are involved, that the benefits go to them and not are hijacked by some perhaps external actors. So that was my last bit. Well, to involve local communities from the beginning and make sure that the benefits go to them. But so that's kind of the ideas, but I don't know how innovative they are. I don't know if that was new for you.
Well, maybe the team will want to come back on that in a moment. But before I turn to Marta, because I haven't forgotten you again, question for you on the work that GFDRR and WRI are doing together in Africa with a lot of partners. AFDB, GGKP, GIZ, and SIDA are also partners of this study to map the potential. You want to talk about this collaboration and where this is going?
Sure, thanks. And so this has been about a year long already, and we've got at least a few more months to go on this. But the premise of the study and the push to this was to really understand what the opportunities for nature-based solutions for adaptation were on the continent. And we sort of focused particularly on sort of MDBs and what they are doing on the continent, right? So what has worked? What are the challenges? What are sort of potential avenues that we can use to actually scale this up? Out of a survey and sort of desk interviews and project documents, we identified over 15,000 potential investments. We actually sent out the survey to 15,000 stakeholders, identified over 300 investments, of which we then went into a deep dive and have about 85 that are actually have MBS components, right? From mostly from a MDB perspective, and we're now expanding this into private sector investments as well going forward. This is valued, this is over the last, I think, 10 years, and we valued that about at $4.5 billion. And 64% of these 85 projects have been gray-green infrastructure projects. So again, I think low-hanging fruit as to where can you, at the margins, potentially integrate nature-based solutions. But then you have actually about 36%, so about just about 15 projects. Math is not my strong suit right now, but 36% of these projects are focused either on water or agriculture, water being the most sort of prominent sector where you can see nature-based solutions. I think part of the things that we've really identified through this work and through the deep dives into this, one is, I think, the lack of capacity to really translate a lot of the understanding around the potential benefits of nature-based solutions into sort of financial benefits, such that you can have a resources flow. Second piece is guidelines and actually having standardized sort of benefits that you can evaluate from each project, right? So how do you actually scale this up? And if it's each development of a project really takes this dedicated due diligence process, how would you actually start to standardize some of this understanding of benefits such that you actually can scale this up faster? The other piece is the understanding of even what a bankable NBS project is, even from an MDB perspective, is where do you actually what are the standards for bankability? How do you actually get private sector to understand and have a common understanding for themselves of what bankability is from their perspective? And how do you actually have sort of technical assistance on the ground to speed up this process? We're still sort of, I think, working on our final report that will come out later this year. But the idea is that we're actually going to develop or do similar work with private sector investments to see where the opportunities are, particularly in the sub-Saharan Africa region, because of the fact that there is a lot of demand. And I think understanding that this could actually be a very beneficial way of addressing some of the infrastructure gap that you see within the continent as well.
Thank you so much. And I think it touched upon one of the questions that we had in the chat, differentiating the economic benefits, from the financial benefits, and how do you make the case to bring the private sector. So same thing, like in the Q&A, we might want to come back on that. But I return to Marta now. In terms of more the research agenda, I think people would be really interested in having an idea of what are the main priorities for further work, and where do you see the progress in the academic world. And I think there is one very interesting question in the chat that I'll ask just right away, which is, if you did not find any cases where these nature-based solutions are not cost-effective, it's probably also because people don't do bad projects, right? But one of the question was, can we have a sense of what are the good projects, but also what are the bad projects, right? It's also important to try to identify the cases where it might not be the right solution, and it might not be something on which people are publishing a lot because it's not very popular, but it's still an important part. So I don't know if you have also a few thoughts about those projects which might not be the right one before they get implemented.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting questions. So actually, first, before starting, I actually wanted to contextualize a joke that Sergio made before about Formula One. Before the talk, I told him that my kids were very excited that I was meeting Sergio Perez because they're very big Formula One. And they asked me for an autograph, so I probably will ask. They're 5 and 8, so understandable. So in terms of directions of research, I think that's something that emerged very clearly when we went through all the articles and we screened them for recommendations. Something that emerged very clearly was that in 44% of articles, they indicated data limitations, and they indicated that often these data limitations were leading to very strong assumptions during the analysis and potentially uncertainty about some estimates. And these data limitations were essentially on the benefit side, because costs are easy to calculate. We have the markets. But for benefits, we have to be creative and we have to develop new methodologies to identify them and measure them. So something that we need to do, at least from the research side, is to really be more proactive in identifying benefits and evaluating them and measuring them. In this light, there is something, as we said, and this is in relation to the bad projects or in relation to something that Nishi was mentioning before about the long-term vision, the long-term trajectory. There was no monitoring reported in the studies that we analyzed. And I think the monitoring is an important aspect. It's expensive, but if it's included by design in the project, it would be very beneficial to understand whether some projects are good projects or not good projects and what the benefits are in the long term, because we would be able to monitor them. Then something else that is related to this is, but how do we do all this? Because from a scientific standpoint, so imagine yourself in a university. If you do it at the university level, you're going to be associated with a department. You can publish in certain journals. It can be very difficult to do interdisciplinary research, and to investigate benefits, you have to work with an interdisciplinary team. So this is another factor that we have to take into account. The good news is that now there are more and more grants to support research, interdisciplinary research, and there is immense interest in nature-based solutions. So this is happening. I think we are really at a tipping point in terms of where the research is going. And I would also like to mention that from the point of view of international organization, but this is going to be very beneficial for scientists as well. I was speaking with Boris, and his group here at the World Bank is trying to create a consortium of private companies and universities to consolidate project-level data on cost and benefits. This is very valuable. We have to create really human capital to share information about cost and benefits. There is another aspect that I wanted to mention. This is just to create really a constellation of data points for you in terms of where the research is going, which is that nature-based solutions are very useful in mitigating climate change. But I mean, we know we need to measure all these implications. But one aspect that we have to also consider is that since the 2007 IPCC, we know that ecosystems are being affected by climate change. So in academia, we have also started looking at how the effectiveness may be affected by climate change itself. And this is just part of the research. But it's important research and it's exciting research to do. And we have already started working in my university in interdisciplinary teams with geosciences to integrate these two aspects of the story. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much. And so now we have received a few other questions. So this question on the especially the cases where NBS might not be the right approach were from Stefano Paggiola and Ko Takashi. We have a few other questions which maybe I'll just read here, and then we can just go through the panel once more to try to touch on them. And I think they tend to be around the same topic of the challenges in implementing nature-based solutions. So I understand a lot of the studies are like ex-ante assessments. So if you implement well your nature-based solution, this is how much great benefits you'll get. But what about the cases where it's not implemented in the right way? And so the questions were about from Frida Rhodes on all of the technical challenges and the need for more maintenance to just make sure the benefits are maintained over time. And we had also a question on the time it takes for the benefits to materialize. So it can be longer when you use nature-based solution instead of pure engineering-based solution. And finally, maybe a last point from me. A few of you just sort of like opposed nature-based solutions and engineering solutions. As a French engineer, I just wanted to ask about if that distinction is really useful, or if it's more like the engineering solution should bring nature more into how they are designed, but without trying to make this distinction between those two dimensions. So maybe we'll go into the same order. We'll start with you, Sergio, then Nisha, Julie, and Marta will give you the last word.
So it's about implementing, about the time it takes to get the co-benefits, and then last time was confronting these two. No, perhaps let's start with this. In our idea, and what we do in Switzerland, it's not confronting them, but it's combining them, and to combine them, you have to go into the detail and see, okay, what is possible with nature-based solutions, and of course taking into account the co-benefits, but what not, and then how some reinforcements of, for example, for gully erosion, if you can do everything through vegetation, or if you need some more agavian or structures, you have to look, but you have to not confront them, but combine the measures. So, and then perhaps for the question about time, well, this is in fact very important, but not only for nature-based solutions, because always you have to take into account the net present value of investments, and when are you investing, and when are you going, and the cost of money, and that depends a lot, that changes a lot in each context, and there are contexts where the interest rates are very high, so investing in something that you will get the benefits in the future, it's very uncertain. So this leads, of course, to short terms, but it's something you have to take into account because every context is different.
Thank you, Nisha, and maybe in your region everything is urgent, right? So
yeah. So I think maybe that last question first as well. I mean, to the point, I think what we're trying to do is to make sure that nature is one of the options within engineering, right? That I think we do just as much analysis to have a nature-based solutions project as we do to a hard infrastructure or gray infrastructure project, right? And I don't think we can underestimate the amount of sort of modeling and other things that we have to do. And so I think it is in some ways, it is an option within the engineering toolbox, and that's kind of how we should be thinking about it, and potentially how we should be teaching it going forward as well. In terms of the maintenance question, I think it's interesting that we talk about maintenance for MBS, but not as much then in comparison to gray infrastructure, which also we undervalue, right? So in that sense, if we were to actually fully sort of evaluate the cost of maintaining an MBS project versus a hard infrastructure project, I think the actual cost of maintaining a hard infrastructure project over time, I think we might actually end up still lower on MBS potentially, but I'm not a modeler, so again, don't have the data for that. But I think that again is not maybe a dichotomous answer anymore as well. In terms of the benefits aspect, I agree, and I think that's the reason why we don't have as much private flows into it, is because of the longer term sort of nature of it. I do wonder if there's a case to be made in terms of the implicit liabilities that both private sector and governments are taking on by not integrating longer term benefits into their decision making. Because, for example, you do have, at the end of the day, governments are responsible for any sort of failure, and I guess within their economies, and especially from a disaster perspective. And if you have sort of better maintained or more resilient MBS solutions available, then wouldn't a government actually be reducing it as implicit liabilities over time if we were to really think about this? So the longer time dimension could be actually a factor within at least public financing. I guess for private financing, as you were saying, you know, if you have higher interest rates, you have other sort of reasons for why you might not be investing in MBS, which I don't know what the answer to addressing that is. And I think it's okay to say I don't know yet. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, I was thinking of this because being in Brazil last week, where private sector investors mentioned the role of concessional finance to create grace periods. They're saying, like, for afforestry, it takes a long time to deliver. And so the way to provide concessional finance is more bringing a grace period so that you don't have to reimburse your loan too quickly, instead of reducing the interest rate, for instance. I thought it was an interesting dimension for NBS. Julie?
Yeah, maybe first on the trade-off between, or the dichotomy between gray and green infrastructure, I agree. I think they're just complementary. In Colombo, they were running out of engineering options, which is why they were considering the wetlands. I mean, at least affordable engineering options. But on the question of the maintenance costs and the fact that the benefits can be in the long run, I think it depends also if it's conservation versus recreation or restoration of ecosystems. If you're conserving ecosystems, the benefits are already there, you're trying to protect them, but the costs often are low enforcement, and those can be quite high, or they can be political costs, which was also the case in Colombo. I don't think we have great solutions for this, but in Colombo, what we did within the project was to create some parks around the wetlands for people to come do like bird watching and jogging and things like that, which already reduces a little bit the incentives for like unlawful urban development. But yeah, you know, the deforestation issues in Brazil, it's also all a law enforcement issue, and I'm not sure what we have to offer. And the costs are quite high to assess.
Martha.
Thank you. Yes, I think I'm gonna just agree a lot with what has been said, and I would like to emphasize two aspects. The first is that the way in which we measure cost benefit matters a lot. So if we consider an engineering solution, so I agree that there is complementarity between the type of solutions, and probably the landscape is more of a landscape with gradients of integration between the different types of strategies. But if we compare engineering solutions and nature-based solutions, we should be very careful, because in evaluating engineering solutions, often the time horizons used in cost benefit are shorter than the time horizons used for nature-based solutions. And so essentially, we cut off from the analysis a long stream of benefits. You can have infinite benefits in terms of timeline with nature-based solutions. So the cost benefit should take that into account. And as Sergio was mentioning, the discount rate matters. So when we were reviewing studies about cost benefit analysis and there was one discount rate and it was 12%, that's a problematic approach. There should be robustness checks with multiple discount rates, also lower discount rates that take into account long-term benefits, or give them some weight and doesn't just drop them down to zero in the calculation. So the way calculations are done, it's also important to compare the benefits of these different types of solutions. So that was just the technical aspect that I thought was very important that Sergio mentioned. And yes, I also wanted to emphasize the importance of conservation versus restoration. Conservation is very cheap, and we shouldn't just eliminate something that is already there to replace it with an engineering solution without taking into account the long-term benefit of the existing green infrastructure. So these were just some considerations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so thanks to all of our panelists. I mean, I like this idea also of the hybrid mixing of options between nature-based and engineering, because I think there is sometimes sort of a feeling that high-income countries can have the fancy dikes and hard infrastructure, and then in low-income countries you have nature-based solution. I think presenting them as sort of the high-tech solution that brings everything together is making it more attractive than sometimes the second best option that people have in mind. So it's more than just a language issue. I think it's important in how we sell them. We now turn to you, Niels, for closing remarks. I think you should, because we're using all of the other chairs.
Do I need to do anything to... Is it on? Yeah, sounds like it. All right, just briefly, well, certainly thanks to all of you at the table, including the moderator. I think you did a fantastic job, Stefan. I hope you get a sense, those of you in the room, those of you connected, a little bit about how we're trying to operate at GFDRR, the role we're trying to fill. You got voices here at the table that come at the opportunities and sometimes challenges related to nature-based solutions from different angles. It's very important for us to try to bring in all of those experiences, that know-how, in how we then turn around, and maybe Julie in particular at the table, who represents the world banker who's out there working with a city or working with a country to try to enable them to do better nature-based solutions as part of their risk management. So it's really, you might have picked up on some of Boris's slides. There was one slide where there's a bunch of numbers. And a few of those numbers was saying something like 550 knowledge pieces and more than 100 experts, and that was in one of the small boxes. No, and that's just a few numbers. That means that we are attempting to play that connecting role, because we are focusing on a topic that, compared to disaster risk management more broadly, is quite specific. We have a potential, and I believe an ability, to bring in the right kind of people in the right opportunity on the ground in the right moment that may enable a city like Colombo to actually save its wetlands, not because we are preaching that it's good for biodiversity, but because we are helping them see that it's good for their risk management objectives. And that is in essence what we try to do and how we try to operate, and we look forward to continue to do it with you. I believe anyone in this room is probably interested in nature-based solutions, which means that if we're not already working with you, we soon will be, and we look forward to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Niels, and thanks again to our panelists and Boris and all of the team who prepared the reports. I'm giving the floor to you.
Thank you, Steph.
Thanks.